My name is Dave Ashheim. I'm the founder of Engage Buy Sell. We've been in business about 15 years trying to help organizations with engagement. Our first foray was in the cultural space, museums and parks and gardens, and I see quite a few of our clients here that came from that sector. And then as cell phones became more powerful and people became more used to using their phone for doing business, we've moved. Probably 80% of our business now is helping organizations like all of you that I see here with all kinds of different mobile solutions. We have a division called Train by Sell, and that's where we met Shannon. So Shannon, maybe just a little background on yourself.
Yes. Shannon Tipton. I am the owner of Learning Rebels, and Learning Rebels works with organizations like yours to help you think differently about the way you are presenting learning to the people within your organization. Understanding that learning doesn't necessarily have to or should happen in the classroom. So how can we make training be less frustrating, less disruptive, and more applicable to what you do every day? And that's what we do as Learning Rebels.
Great. So to separate our organizations, Engage by Sell is the technology side. We have some, of course, knowledge about the pattern of drips and training, but the real expert in the content side and how to deliver it effectively is Shannon. So that's how we have come together. We met this year at the ATD conference, I believe, and it was an instant marriage because we are all about micro and turning content and learning of any kind of activity into little bits and pieces, and you'll see some examples of that here. So I'll speak just for a few minutes about what we've learned, and then Shannon's got a presentation that she gives. Shannon, you speak at conferences. You are a very busy lady, right, on the speaker scene.
I get around.
Get around. Okay, so you folks are getting the benefit of hearing Shannon today and her expertise. All right. Here we are, and a little bit about us. 15 years in business. As I said, started with museums, and then we moved into HR and nonprofits, and about 4,000 clients, all using our technology. A little bit about micro-learning. This is a buzzword that's been around for a long time, but without technology, it's been a little bit hard to pull that off. I will send all of you these slides, but basically, there's 4 or 5 things I'm just going to mention. One is just in time, whether you're a docent at a museum or you're doing sales training or it's onboarding, it's recruiting, it's any of these activities, information's got to be nice and short. And when you can send out a text and a link to maybe a page of content like you see here, this just-in-time learning seems to be very effective, especially on a phone. Everybody, of course, on the call today has either a learning management system or some kind of content portal. I would say probably some of your employees are not checking that out every single day, but if you grab a little piece of that, send it out via text or via email, you're going to find out that you get a lot more engagement. Same thing about content retention. Shannon's going to talk about this in more detail, but when you drip it out and it hits my phone and I don't have to go to a computer, how wonderful is that to kind of shorten it up? And of course, polls and surveys, very easy, very fun to do on a phone. It doesn't take much time, helps reinforce all of the learning. And of course, we're big supporters of this term. Anybody that's gone to a SHRM or an ATD conference has heard about drip learning. We call it drip text messaging. Send a little text message. Maybe as you see here, there's a little link that can take me to a little exercise to do, and it just extends that learning. And you can make it fun. You can have leaderboards. You can gamify it. Lots of ways to make it super exciting. So that's been kind of our experience on the tech side. What we've got here is your first assignment, everybody. Take out your phone, open your camera, and scan that. Of course, that's going to go, Shannon, I believe, to your site. but that could have gone to a page of content, a video, something to look at, something to do right now. And when you scan a QR code, it's instantaneous and it's super fast. So let me stop sharing my computer and we will turn it over to you, Shannon, to take it from here.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Welcome. You know what, in the chat, just everyone do me a favor and let me know, how familiar are you with the term microlearning? And if you are familiar with it, what are you using it for? So that would be most helpful for me. Why don't you go ahead and do that? So not familiar, thank you. And this safe place, right? That's why we're all here. If you don't know anything about microlearning or you're just kind of dipping your toe into the water, let me know. That's what we're all here for, right? We're all here to learn and grow together. So I see not familiar. I hear it all the time, but I'm not sure I understand it. Familiar from a recent ATD conference. Good. I've seen variety of definitions. You're absolutely right about that, Kathy. Oh, hi, Kathy. I just saw your last name. Hi, Kathy. So yes, more familiar and you want to use it more. Thank you for that, Kelly. Familiar, but you haven't adopted it much. Great. Thank you, everybody, for that feedback. And that's where we're actually going to kick off a little bit. So I'm going to give you just a nano about micro. How's that for being meta? And we're going to level set our understanding here. So let me share my screen real quick. There we go. Hopefully. Let's see. And are you seeing, hopefully you're seeing my slideshow rather than my presentation mode. Yes, looks great, looks good. Thank you, everybody, for that feedback. All right, let's rock and roll. So when we talk about microlearning, a lot of times we understand the term micro and we understand the term learning. But when we put those two things together, we often get this face. Does that look familiar to you? Yeah. Because I don't know what people want from me. They're just talking microlearning and I'm not sure what exactly that means. Well, let me break down a definition that I've been working with. Now, I've been working in the microlearning space since about 2015. And this is the go-to definition that I have been using ever since. So microlearning is short bursts of focused right-sized content to help people achieve a specific outcome. Okay, so now share with me in the chat what is resonating with you about this definition. Like tapas, yes, like tapas. It's right-sized for my appetite. Specific outcomes, absolutely. Specific outcomes, everybody's relating to that. Right-sized and specific. And short. Short and specific. Thank you. Now, when you go back and you look at this definition, and what is it that might be your first question? What question do you have around this definition? How do we get there from here? Thank you, Brenda. What is achievable in short bursts? Thank you, Leah. And what is right size? Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, the media, what sort of content types? Where do we go from here? Where do we start? Right, and a lot of times when we think about what exactly is microlearning, here's one thing that I'd like you to keep in mind, is that microlearning is a way of delivering learning. It's not learning done to you. We don't do learning, right? It's learning in of itself is not something we do to people, right? So microlearning is a way of delivery. So think of it as another modality for you to have in your hip pocket. And using that for certain areas, because there is no right size or one size fits all for everybody. I would love to say microlearning is your magic wand, you know, bing, 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 now all your problems are solved. It doesn't work that way. So think of it as a delivery mechanism. Okay, so now that you have that in your mind, many of you may have seen this before. This is not new news. So let me know in the chat, have you seen this particular infographic before? I see no's and I see yeses. Okay, we see a mix. That's all right. Mixes are good. So this is Meet the Modern Learner by Bernstein by Deloitte. This is Googleable, and you can find it out there in the interwebs. But what I'm going to focus on here is one specific piece of data that comes out of, well, actually two pieces of data that are going to come out of this infographic. First is that 2/3 of workers complain that they don't have time to do their job. 2 out of 3 workers complain that they don't have time to do their jobs. So what does that mean for you? What does that mean for the training that you're putting out there right now? In the chat, what does this mean for the training that you have out in the world right now? Yeah, Brenda, they don't have time for it. This is not something that is high on their radar. Yep, low priority. It's low priority use. And we all feel this pain, don't we? It's not just the humans within your organization, it's you too. You know, as time is progressing, we're finding that more and more pressures are around us. Business is working even faster to try to play catch up. There are all sorts of barriers that are happening right now that's getting in the way of learning in the workplace and helping people stay upskilled in the skills that are critically important to what they do today, not to mention the skills that we don't even know that they're going to need to have coming around the future, coming around the corner tomorrow, right? And so this is where, and yes, David, you're absolutely right. And this is where being succinct is critical. So that specific outcome that I showed you in my definition, that becomes of high priority. Now, the other piece of data that I do want to call back to here is right in the middle of that person's head. It's 1% of the typical work week is all that employees have to focus on training and development. 1%. That's 24 minutes out of a 40-hour work week. That's not a lot of time. Well, if you think maybe 45 hours, give or take. And so if you think about having just 20 minutes out of the week, 20 minutes out of the week, just on the average, that means you've got a lot of competition for that time. And no one is waking up in the morning going, oh, gee, I wonder what my LMS has served me today. No one is wondering that. So this means then that we have to make the connections really critical to what we do. All right. And yes, Maureen, exactly. The pace of change is so fast that by the time we create the microlearning, it may no longer be relevant. Absolutely. And those of you who have heard me talk about this topic before, or who may have been in conference sessions where I have taken microlearning, to the next level, I talk about that often, is that it's got to be quick. It's got to be fit for purpose. It has to be flexible, adaptable, speedy, right? We cannot sit on this for 6 months. And so we have a few myths here. And these are my typical 7 deadly myths of microlearning. And there's only a couple here that I'm going to focus on today. First off is understanding the difference between chunking and microlearning. So let me ask you in the chat, how many of you heard the term microlearning and thought to yourselves, why do we need a fancy word for chunking? Microlearning is just a fancy word for chunking. How many? Let's be honest. It's okay. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Nobody thought that. Okay, thank you. Oh, never heard the term chunking. Okay, Kristen, thank you for that. I'm going to talk about that right now. So you're in the right place. Okay, so let's talk. Okay, yes, Kelly, I think chunking is different. I use chunking to break up a lot of information. That's exactly correct. So when you think about chunking, and chunking is a good thing to do. Chunking means that we are managing people's cognitive load, right? So when we think about all of the information that goes into a person's brain, we need to manage that information in some way. And that is through the concept of chunking. So we chunk down information. Now, here's the thing. When we think about chunking down information, what that means is, for example, you have right now a half an hour webinar on microlearning. Now, if you want to chunk that down into manageable bites, maybe you turn it into 3 10-minute segments. Okay, so we've chunked it down. But what happens is that in order for a person to understand what is happening in segment 2, they must first watch segment 1. And then in order to get the whole learning, they then must watch segment 3. So 1, 2, and 3 are all connected, right? So that means that chunking has a beginning, a middle, and a to be continued attached to each one of the chunks. Now, microlearning is very specific. Microlearning has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's encapsulated. So that means then that it's standalone. I don't have to watch part 2 in order to understand what is happening in part 3. Okay, so that's a big difference there. So I wanted to be clear that we had an understanding of the difference between microlearning and chunking. Right. And the next part is that it doesn't have to be high tech. So that's the next one that I want to talk about, is it doesn't have to be high tech. Microlearning could be as simple as an infographic, an interactive PDF, a checklist, a wallet card, or it could be something a little higher tech like a chatbot, or the tool that you've just looked into now, which is hosted by Engage by Cell, something like a mini website that people access through their phone. So sort of a medium tech. So there's a whole range here. So you don't have to be scared off of thinking, oh my gosh, I got to have special technology in order to create microlearning. That's not true. If you have a really good checklist, you've got something special. Because I'll tell you people, most training nowadays is just a checklist screaming to get out. That's all that's required. So as long as you really kind of let yourself have that freedom to understand that you don't need to do something incredibly polished, incredibly professional in order to get good quality learning reinforcement or learning nudges or performance support out in front of your people, the better off that they are. Just remember, people need help now. They're not going to wait for you to put it through a filter or through your design team or anything like that. So give them the help that they need now. Right, exactly. Microlearning focuses on an outcome, and that's exactly what we want to talk about. So now, really what I want to work out with you, and I'm going to get out of this and I'm going to stop sharing right now. What I would really like to talk to you about is the importance between microlearning and connecting it to your mobile applications. And so if we, David, if you would be so kind as to bring that QR code back up for me, that would be wonderful.
All right, let me find that right here.
Thank you. And so while Dave is doing that, well, I'm going to take a moment here. What questions do you have about microlearning that I can answer for you? Yes, Jennifer, the session will be recorded and it will be available. Yes. What questions do you have about microlearning that I can answer for you? How easy is it to create? Good question, Brenda. So now, when you think about microlearning in general, Microlearning can be something, again, super easy for you to pull together. Most of you probably have very workable checklists that you can use. And those are adaptable, they're flexible. A lot of times they're somewhat evergreen. If you have a process or a procedure, you can put that against a checklist. If you have, let me talk to you about infographics. Here's an infographic example. A lot of times during onboarding, we will do a 1 hour PowerPoint show about the history of your organization. And I hate to break it to you, but people just aren't that interested. So what you can do, though, is what if you created a timeline within an infographic and everybody got a copy of that infographic? Either you printed it out as something really nice that they could take with them if they're working from home, or that they can put on a wall if they're working in their cubes. You know, something that really outlined the history of the organization and cultural peaks and specific outcomes that you achieved as an organization, the special things that you did. And you put that all on an infographic rather than a 30 slide PowerPoint deck, right? So that would be something relatively easy to create. And there are a lot of templates out there that will help you do that. And so now with what you see here with the QR code in front of you, this is about connecting mobile to micro. And so what do you see in front of you? So when you scan this QR code, what you see in front of you, right, is that you've got your different bubbles there. You got the different bubbles that are onboarding schedule, meet the team, resources, task manager. Under the contact us, you could have a who's who there. And so investigating this out, if you see how this is working, if we clicked on the onboarding schedule, you would see your welcome. And what could go underneath that? What sort of micro learning elements could go under the welcome part of this little mini website? Start here. Yeah, start here. I love that title, Brenda. Start here. And then what could go there? That timeline infographic, absolutely. What else would go under start here? Think about your onboarding process. How would you scalpel that down? What else would you put? Imagine some key contacts. Thank you for that. Imagine you have somebody new coming into your organization and you sent them something like this. Now, you do not have to use my services or engaged by sales services in order to make this happen. This is to give you a new and different idea. So this could become a micro learning, quote unquote, green room. So for those of you who are familiar with the talk show, type of circuit, what happens is the stars come on to Fallon and he puts them in a green room so that they're prepared before they come out on stage. So what if you put all of your new people into this type of a green room, right? You put them into this type of a green room. I'm sorry, it's reflecting off of my lights. But you put them into that type of a green room where they could have all of these fun, yet important pieces of information for them to digest before they came into work, before their first day. Right, Natalie, one name and bio per day of a key person to meet. Oh, I love that so much. Yes, and what if that bio were an actual video? Right, so here's a little 2-minute video of the person who's going to sit next to you if you're in office. Or here's a little video of somebody who you might connect with in HR if you had questions about your benefits, right? So these sorts of little bits can easily fit into this type of a mini website type of screen. And so you can have it if you went back and you looked at all of the different bubbles. Again, so we had, it says onboarding schedule, but I love the start here concept. So if you put start here there, and you put meet the team. And so each team member had a little 2-minute video of who they were. And then the resources. This is how you get paid. This is an explanation of what 401k really means. Okay, so these things are important to people before they start, right? And you had one place, and maybe one of these little bubbles was ask me a question, an ask me anything bubble, where they could actually go in and ask you, the hiring manager or the L&D person, any sort of question that they needed that they needed answered before they started their first day. Right. Oh, thank you, Kelly. The top 5 softwares that you're going to use during your time with us. Here's an intro to Slack and Trello and Miro and all those other things that you're going to use. I love this. Yeah, okay, subject matter experts do not like the idea of being recorded. Great. What they don't like their faces being recorded, but what if you did an audio clip? What if you recorded their voice? Right? Or what if you, gave them a Q&A type of bio and let them fill it in? Yeah. And, oh, an animated person. Love that, Brenda. Give them an avatar. I love that. Yeah. And so, and yes, you can track, and according to this, if you use the services, if you use my services in conjunction with Engage by Sell, yes, there is a back-end tracking and back-end analytics, right? And so that's the advantage of using a service like this versus putting one together yourself. But I want you to know that you can put this together. And I realize that we are up against time. And for those of you who have to run, please feel free to run. And you can find me, Shannon at learningrebels.com, or my website, learningrebels.com. But for those of you who are going to hang around for a couple of more moments, I'm going to give you one more example for how you might use this tool. So think about this mini website again. Mini website, that's essentially what we're talking about, which would host a bunch of little micro learning elements that are very specific to use, that meet all of the criteria. Now, rather than onboarding, think about using it for your sales team. So what would happen if your sales team just simply threw a text message? All they did was send a text message and they got information back that gave them product updates, that gave them sales sheets, that gave them a little video demo of the sales product. So that way they could refresh their memory or refresh their negotiation skills before they went in and talked to an actual client, right? Okay, and so you can use it for onboarding, you can use it for sales, you can use that same concept for leadership development. So now, yeah, pitch practice. Thank you for that, Donna. Yeah, absolutely. So they could record a video and upload it themselves. And there you can do peer review, right? And so that also becomes a micro learning element. And so there is so much that we can do to take micro learning based on the definition that I gave you at first and apply it to a mobile application. Or you could create your own mini website. You can use Google Sites for that. You can have your marketing team help you set one up. So there are ways to make that happen. That told me my time was up. But so many ways that you can do it. School training, chapter reviews. Yes, so think leadership development. So if you, in your leadership development programs, if you had them read a book, let's say, so they read one of Franklin Covey's books, or 1 Minute Manager, or any one of those books. You could do chapter reviews, you could do book reviews, you can ask them, how does this book apply to where we work? Go off and take a video, go interview somebody, take some pictures. There's a variety of different ways that you can have people use this sort of technology in conjunction with your micro learning. So there you go. You've got micro learning in 32 minutes. All the things you ever wanted to know. And you can find me at learningrebels.com. And if you send me an email, I will be more than happy to send you some additional resources about microlearning, as well as drip feed learning that came through with my ATD session. So my ATD session was drip spots and blogs, learning reinforcement, non-traditional learning reinforcement through microlearning. And I'm happy to send you that information as well. So feel free to send me an email and I will be open with all of my information. Dave?
Thanks, Shannon. You know, that comment about 20, 24 minutes, do you think that's the amount of time that people want to spend on training, or they just don't want to enter their admin user ID, go to the computer? It's just too big of a lift. While if it's broken into little chunks, little micro learning bits, it can actually get more than 20, 30 minutes in a week, because you're just dropping maybe 2 or 3 minutes a day out, and it can really add up to maybe double that.
I think that's a great point. A lot of times people put learning into one bucket, right? And so it's like, oh, I have to do a course or I have to do an online program in order to get my learning in today. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, right? So if you took, if you put learning into a mobile application and you sent them text messages that gave them a little nudge, that might be a minute of them watching a video or reviewing an article or something along those lines. And yes, you could get more quote unquote learning into the course of the week.
Yeah, I think that's right. It just seemed like it's more digestible if it comes in on my phone as something that I can just do right now in between whatever I'm doing. And it's not a big thing. I think more people will, they want to learn, they want to get trained. It's just, it can't be too difficult to do, too hard to do.
Right, that's it, is that we create a lot of frustrating barriers. You make people, if you don't have single sign-in for your LMS, that's another password they have to remember. Then there's a learning path that they have to remember. It's just not as easy as going to, oh, I'm going to click on safety and find my safety training. Usually you have to go into learning and development or risk management, find safety, find ladders, find the video, and you're 8 clicks in and you've lost people, right? So it has to be easy to find.
Do you think in a post-COVID world, this is just going to accelerate at even a much greater pace than it ever was intended before or thought?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think what we have experienced in this post or even still in COVID world is that we're less connected because we're not in office. And so how can I reach you in a way that's not disruptive to your workday? And so the more of these sorts of tools coming out, the better off we're going to be, because people don't want to be yanked back and forth. I don't want to go from learning to work, from learning to work to learning to work. If it's just embedded in my day, then that makes it easier for me.
How do people measure? The question that I get all the time is, if I use your technology, Dave, what's the ROI on it? How does one begin to measure the success of microlearning with or without this technology?
We should always start with a business goal in mind. So we should not be creating any training that is not aligned with an overall business goal or with a KPI, a key performance indicator. And so this way we can measure up against that KPI. So if we say that this microlearning bundle of information for our sales team, this is going to help our sales team make greater sales per person, per product. And so then you go back at the end of the quarter, let's say, and you go, did we in fact get more sales per person, per product? If yes, we've seen success. So you don't even necessarily need an LMS to tell you that. So as long as we are reaching these specific KPIs, then we know that we're seeing business success. And that's really what matters, isn't it?
Can all learning be micro-sized, or is there some learning that is just not appropriate?
It can all be micro size, so they can all be bits. Here's the key. So that's a really important question. There are some topics that are well suited for being broken into micro learning bits, let's just say. And that typically are processes and procedures, hard tasks, learning software, things like that. Now, there are more softer skills or core skills like communication or emotional intelligence or leadership, where you don't want to provide learning for that topic in its entirety through micro bits. What you might want to do is augment it with micro bits. So maybe you anchor emotional intelligence in a virtual class, right? So somebody spends an hour, let's say, in a virtual class learning about emotional intelligence and how it affects them at work. But then after they leave that class, then you have some learning reinforcement that goes out once a week that reminds them, do this, say this, read this, right? And so you have this sort of learning reinforcement that underpins the key messaging. And then maybe in the next month, you have another virtual session for another hour that tackles another piece of emotional intelligence. And then for another 3 weeks, you have some underpinning micro-learning elements to support it. So this is how you can bring this all together. And also, that's another great way to use a mini sort of website like what you might have, or text messaging approach, to get feedback and give people those bits of information that they need.
Yeah, we've seen that sometimes it's delivering the content, sometimes it's reinforcing that, and then other times it's just encouragement. Hey, how are things going?
Right.
Here's a text that comes in. Are you still having any issues dealing with what we talked about? And so it's more like the arm around the shoulder. How can we help you here?
That. The arm around the shoulder. I love that. So yeah, and I think microlearning is perfect for that. It's perfect for, the performance support, learning reinforcement, those sorts of important nudges, reminders, and yes, absolutely feedback, just giving people support when they need support, help when they need help.
Well, we're a little bit out of time. Any more questions for Shannon before we break? If so, type them in the chat window. And
I appreciate everyone hanging out for this.
It's so great.
Extra 10 minutes of Q&A.
It's great. Well, there's just so many important things you're talking about. And I think people were a little confused before, but I think the confusion has ended. So that's great. All right. So no more questions, but Shannon, you're available for consultations and to talk to people anytime, as are we. And maybe Shannon and Anna, you can put your email again in the chat window. There it is. Here's a question for you, Shannon.
How often should we use it? Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate you attending. Brenda, I'm not sure I understand your question. How often should we use it? Do you mean how often should we be using microlearning? Just before I go off on a soapbox and answering the wrong thing. Yes. How often should we be using microlearning? As often as we can, because it really does. That's what makes learning stick. And that's the biggest question I get is how can we make our training stick? Training fails for 2 reasons, and 2 reasons only: a lack of feedback and a lack of learning reinforcement. So a lack of feedback loop, meaning we're not coming back to people and checking in on them. Are they okay? Do they need help? And then lack of learning reinforcement, meaning that we're treating the learning event as a one and done. So we're not going back to them and giving them little pieces from which to play. So as often as we can create some sort of micro-learning support, the better off that we are. So I would say any training program that you create right now should have a strategy behind it as to how are we going to reinforce this with micro-learning, or better yet, can this training program be micro-learning rather than a training course? And most of the time, the answer to that is yes.
Right. Yeah, great question. All right. Well, thank you, Shannon, for participating. It's fantastic. And we will get everybody some material tomorrow morning. But it's been great having you with us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Good seeing you.
Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.